Hello and welcome to this week's episode of A Nice Cup of History. Today, or last night rather, marked the 108th anniversary of the sinking of the RMS Titanic, and we thought it would only be fitting to let that be the topic of this week's episode. We've got a lot of information for you. Mostly we're starting off with the construction, the initial setting sail, life at sea, and then leading up to that fateful night and the aftermath of it. And to round it all off, we have a ridiculous survival, or set of survivals rather, for one particular passenger. So without any further ado, let's set sail and let's get historical.
So we'll start where all good stories, I guess, do at the very beginning. This was way before the Titanic was even thought about being built. The early 1900s, transatlantic passenger trade was really highly profitable because it was what hasn't been that long since like the power steam engine had been invented.
Yeah.
Let alone, it still blows my mind how things like boats and planes kind of happen. Like a boat that heavy can just be on the water. I don't get it, but that's just my brain not computing.
It's all about the ballast, baby.
Physics. But yeah, so it was relatively a new concept.
There's been a couple of like your main sailors, shall I say, your main lines.
Yeah.
The two most outstanding ones were White Star Line and Cunard. Did you know Cunard, French word for duck? The duck line.
That's actually quite clever.
Yeah.
Because obviously ducks are on the water and whatnot. Obviously. Wow.
The Cunard specialised in speed ships, and their two main flagships were the Lusitania and the Mauretania.
Yeah, they were more to do with speed.
Yeah.
The head of the Cunard wanted to have the fastest ships.
Yeah.
So that was kind of like his USP, his selling point. But then the White Star Line wanted to do something to obviously set themselves apart.
Yeah.
So the chairman of the White Star Line was a guy called J. Bruce Ismay, which you've probably heard of because he was also portrayed in the Titanic movies. So he was obviously quite a prolific guy for all of this.
Yeah.
He met with William Pierre, who controlled the Belfast shipping firm Harland and Wolff.
Interesting fact. If you go to Belfast, the shipyard, you can still see the original Harland and Wolff cranes that were involved in the construction of Titanic and her sister ship.
That's very cool.
They're still there.
That's very cool. So yeah, those two met, and they decided that they were going to rival the liners, and they were going to focus on comfort rather than speed.
A bit like me, I'm built for comfort, not speed. She says, clapping her belly.
Wow.
You little bit of
You just compare yourself. You compared yourself.
I compared
to a
myself.
ship.
Yeah, I float. I have good ballast. I'm buoyant. I'm big, and I'm built for comfort.
Wow. Right. Okay. So they decided that obviously they not only did they want to outdo with comfort, they wanted to outdo with size and amount, because obviously things are better if they're bigger.
Thank you. They wanted to make them big, bold, and beautiful.
Exactly.
And they gave them names to match.
They did.
You had the Britannic.
Yep.
The Olympic.
Mm-hmm.
And the Titanic.
Yep.
Literally meaning gigantic, like Greeks, Titans.
Yep.
Titanic.
Yep.
And it went through a couple of name changes. It started off as the SS Titanic, SS meaning screw steamers.
Which just meant that they travelled because everything was made by screws. It's literally just as simple as that.
Just what it says on the tin.
Yeah.
And then it became the RMS Titanic, which meant Royal Mail steamer, because she then carried Royal Mail as well as passengers.
Yeah. So she got to be royal because she took some letters.
Nobody ever talks about the loss of letters.
What was written in those letters?
History.
Wow. Yeah, but what if there was like scandal and whatnot in those letters?
There were some very grateful people afterwards for that side of things.
I can imagine.
The RMS Titanic then, they started to build her in Belfast in the Harland and Wolff docks on March the 3rd, 1909. So it took a wee while to build her.
Yeah.
She was built side by side with her sister Olympia and was designed by a Mr. Thomas Andrews.
Again, depicted in the actual film, and is quite a prolific person within this story. I keep saying it's a story, which it kind of is a story, but it's real.
Yeah.
We are aware that it's a real thing.
Within this story and within this history.
Yeah.
By the way, we laugh and joke American. I think we are a little bit cavalier about it, but we will be serious when it requires being serious. At this point, there was a lot of hope. There was a lot of joy. You know, these ships were perfect. They were unsinkable.
Yep, and just go. We'll just do a little bit of the I guess not boring facts, but more of the numbers.
For you mathematics kids out there.
So the Titanic was 882 feet and 6 inches long,
or 269 meters.
Yeah, it was 92.5 feet wide,
or 28.3 meters,
and 175 feet tall,
or 53.3 meters.
She had a gross tonnage, which means the carrying capacity, of 46,328 tons, and when was fully laden, she weighed more than 47,000 tons and reached a speed of 23 knots, which was the fastest for her size.
So she was big, comfortable, and speedy.
She was, and we're saying she because ships are known as female.
Yeah, all ships, cars, planes, everything, they're always female.
They are.
Not entirely sure why. There's got to be some reason for it, but let's not question it.
Nope.
She had 4 funnels, but only 3 of them worked. The 4th was for aesthetic reasons and to make her look more powerful. So if you see any images of the claiming to be of the Titanic, but there's only 3 funnels, you can turn around and say, ha, no, she had 4.
Well, technically, everywhere says that the 3rd one didn't work, and it didn't. It didn't work as a funnel, but it did provide some ventilation for the kitchens. So it didn't work as a funnel. It wasn't 100% useless.
It worked as a chimney.
But yeah, it was put up there to be useless, and they then just thought, you're above the kitchen. Let's put a little hole in the bottom.
Yeah, like a massive cooker hole top thing.
And the reason they were so tall, the funnels, was to make sure, because obviously that's where the coal came out. There'd be a lot of ash. 100 tons of ash went into the sea almost daily from Titanic. But they were so tall, the funnels, so that the ash wouldn't go on the first class passengers below. That's why the funnels were so tall, so that the wind would carry it off.
That makes sense. Although that would have caused some drag if in high winds for her, I suppose. So that would have slowed her down a bit. But when the sea was calm, she would have got a rate of knots. By May 31st, 1911, Titanic was launched, so she was officially in the water at this point, still in Belfast, and she began her fitting out phase, which meant that she had machinery loaded onto the ship, interior work could begin, having a look just basically making her perfect. The Olympics set sail first. Her maiden voyage was in June 1911, and after that they realised there were some slight tweaks they could make to the Titanic, so they did. And then in April 1912, she underwent her initial sea trials and she was declared seaworthy. At this point, she then moved from Belfast to Southampton, where they've got the White Star Line dock still there. You can see the original White Star offices there. And the dock where the Titanic sailed from, there is a lovely little monument there to say she sailed from this dock.
That's very cool. I've not been there. They're places I want to go to.
Yeah.
Because I really love the history of Titanic. Like, we were discussing it yesterday when we were going through our research and getting ready for this podcast about how much more my school did of the Titanic in history than your school.
Yeah, my school, it was literally about a lesson and a half, maybe 2 at the most.
Ours was about 4 weeks lessons. We watched the movie. And we had a sheet of paper where we'd learn, the movie was the last thing we did. We learned all about the Titanic, and then we watched the movie, and we had to compare the movie with real life to see how accurate the movie was. And then we had to do this massive project on the Titanic, which was then like a lot of our grade. And that was obviously that's what we did in history, so...
I'd like to take you there one day, but I went on the 100th anniversary, the centenary. I went to Southampton, saw the dock, and in one of the parks in Southampton, they had a massive scale chalk drawing on the floor of the outline of the Titanic with all the different rooms and all the different lifeboats. It is pretty big. And they had stories playing out over speakers while you were there, and it was really moving. There was one story I'll tell you later on about someone, and there was information on the lifeboats about how many people got in the lifeboats and about the amount of people that died and things like that. So that was quite moving. And then there's the Titanic museum exhibit at Southampton. And I'll tell you about something later on with that as well, because you follow different characters through. I say characters, they're actual people. But there's the captain, there's one of the officers, there's one of the like the crew. There's a couple of passengers, first class, second class, and steerage, or third class, and you follow them through. And you can follow their stories, and you follow like different coloured lines for each person, and then at the end there's different bits that tell you what happened to them. And there's one bit, and you follow this one guy through, and I think he's one of the officers, and you see him standing there in his initial photo, and he's holding a pocket watch. And you go through, and right at the very end, in the last room, there's just a box with the pocket watch, and the time on that pocket watch is the time that the ship sank, and he went into the water, and it was pulled from his dead hand out of the water.
Wow.
And it's just that moment of, oh, okay, real people. But yeah,
there's things like this that you hear. I don't know about you, but when you hear so much about them and there's so much media about it, you kind of forget that it actually happened.
Yeah.
If that makes sense, because obviously the only thing I can kind of liken it to that I've been to, and obviously I know, and I'm not being flippant, but it's like World War One.
Yeah.
We know World War One happened. We've been told all of the disaster. We've been told all the facts. But when I went to Belgium.
When you went to a Belgian place.
Yeah, when I went to Belgium and I went to Ypres and all over it, and you go to the places, you kind of get reminded that this actually happened. Yeah. And it's not just something you've been told about or you've watched or you've looked at pictures. You're there.
That's one thing I always say about history. It's easy enough to learn about it in a classroom or read about it in a book, but it doesn't hit home until you become part of it, until you actually experience it, until you go to the war graves or the trenches or the castles or the museums, and you see the stuff and you realise the human interaction.
You touch the stuff, Carrie?
Touch the stuff. I love to touch the stuff. Touch all the stuff.
Yeah. That's from our previous episode.
Yeah. But there was a moment I'll talk about later that was probably one of the most poignant things I think I've been to Ypres as well.
Yeah.
And this moment has stuck with me more than most of my time at Ypres.
Wow.
It was crazy.
Cool. So, back to the Titanic itself. Yeah. The day it set sail, the 10th of April, 1912. As you said, it was in Southampton. And they kind of went, not backwards, but they had a bit of a weird way of getting to New York.
Like ding, ding, ding.
Yeah, they went to Southampton, and then they went over to Gisborne in France. Mm-hmm. Then they went over to Queenstown in Ireland, which is
now known as Cove in Cork.
Yeah. And then they went to New York. So it went from Belfast to Southampton to France to back to Ireland, on its way to NYC.
Yeah.
The captain of the ship was Captain Edward J. Smith. He was known as the Millionaire's captain. And not to be facetious, it was because he was captain to the Millionaires. But it's because if he was the captain of the ship, you knew that prolific people were going to be on that ship.
Yeah.
He was liked by the rich, trusted by the rich. He was the dude.
To be fair, that's quite an accolade to have.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean he was a good captain, but it means he was respected enough that they put their trust in him.
Yeah, he's also the one that said that the Titanic was completely unsinkable because machinery and boat manufacturing had come on leaps and bounds.
I mean, in theory, he was right.
Yep.
But things
happened.
Life got in the way.
Yeah.
Life had other plans.
Yeah, and we will definitely get into that.
Yeah. There were, as you say, a number of prominent people on board, a number of millionaires, including the American businessman Benjamin Guggenheim, the British journalist William Thomas Stead, and Macy's department store co-owner Isidore Straus and his wife Ida.
Who have a very, very, very sad ending, which is depicted in the film, and we will discuss later.
Yeah. Ismay and Andrews also travelled on it. You know, that's showing how much faith they had in their engineering, in their ship. The chairman of White Star Line and the creator, the builder, the engineer himself decided to travel on it because she was unsinkable.
Yeah.
When she left Ireland the second time, so when she set sail from Queenstown, there were 2,200 people on board.
Approximately, yeah.
Approximately 1,300 of which were passengers, so the rest were crew.
So that's the day they set sail, when everyone was jubilant, they were happy, it was going to be amazing.
They were starting a new life, they were going to visit family, everything was good, the letters were safe.
this was a massive moment in history, which it was.
Yeah.
Just not for the reasons everyone expected on the 10th of April.
Yeah, at that point, it was going to be the maiden voyage of the fastest, most luxuriant steamliner in the world. She was beautiful. She was unsinkable. It was a feat of engineering. It was wonderful. They had that staircase.
They did.
Yeah.
So, life on board was obviously very, very, very beautiful.
Depending on where you were.
They like it. No, actually,
fair,
all of
yeah.
them. Because we'll talk about each in detail. Obviously, you had the first class, the second class, and the third class. The first class was as opulent as you could possibly imagine.
Yeah.
Second class was likened and compared to that of first class on other boats, on other ships.
Yeah, so they felt like they upgraded.
Yeah, so then the third class was still modest, but was notably quite comfortable. It was more comfortable than third class you'd get on other steamliners, on a boat at that time.
I mean, the vast majority of boats, if you were in third class or steerage, you were stuck in cabins, like right down the bottom. They're really, really small, probably like 2 families to a cabin sometimes. You were lucky if you got a window, and you were not allowed to mingle with the other classes.
Well, on third class, there was 262 cabins. In second class, there was 162, so 100 less cabins for second class.
Yeah.
So they were like, it's weird thing, the second class were actually like the least class, the lesser class of the amount of people that were on the ship.
Yeah, but when you hear about it, you think of like the third class, you think that they made up the majority of the passengers, but actually they didn't. They were roughly just over half.
Yeah.
You know, it was the second class and third class combined, the cabins were less, or about the same as first class.
Yeah, in first class you had 416 cabins.
So we know where the focus was.
Yeah, but also, are you ready for what was on this ship?
Okay.
There was a dining salon, 4 elevators or lifts, a 7-foot deep swimming pool, a squash court, kennels for, your upper class doggies. There was a Turkish bath, which included a steam room, a cool room, a heat room, a massage parlour, and an electric bath. Which
that sounds risky.
It sounds it, but it's actually more likened to a modern day sunbed.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah. A gym, and most of their rooms were decorated like the Ritz Hotel in London.
To make them feel at home.
Yeah. There was a men's smoking room, a reading room, a living area, and a massive reception room. Ridiculous amount of dining rooms, restaurants, cafes. Every evening meal had 13 courses. Foie gras was there, filet mignon, caviar, anything you can possibly think of. And then, as you said before, the staircase. The grand staircase that actually was 5 decks long. Wow. Down.
See, I'll admit, I've been on a couple of cruises. I've been lucky enough. And they are like floating cities, and you do get loads of restaurants. There are swimming pools. There's salons. There's everything you can think of, in the whole massage parlour. But this was on another level.
Yeah, definitely a massive other level.
It was opulence defined. And they even had their own printed newspaper, the Atlantic Daily Bulletin.
Yeah, I mean, what is there daily to read that happened today on the Titanic?
Well, they get news reports through the little people that go di-di-di-di-di-di-di-di. I can't remember what they're called. I've just blanked.
The people who do them, I know what you mean.
Yeah, they get daily news reports from them for any important news, and it's just what was going on the ships. If there were any exciting, I mean, they wouldn't have excursions. They were in the middle of the ocean at that point, but anything like any events or any gatherings, like if there was a prominent lecturer on board, they might give a talk, or there'd be a play or a concert or something, just to let them know what was available that day and just to give them an idea of the menu that night.
Yeah. There was 14,000 gallons of water drunk every day on board the Titanic. There was 13 couples on their honeymoon, which is quite lovely.
At this point,
and see, this is very much first class, but I don't know if this was actually seems that much in how we drink nowadays. Obviously, they were supposed to be on the Titanic from the 10th, and it was supposed to arrive in New York on the 18th. That's 8 days. Yeah. We know there's 416 cabins, so there's, in first class, there's quite a few people.
Minimum 416 people.
Yeah, and there's like 2,200 odd people on board.
Yeah.
They had 1,000 bottles of wine, 20,000 bottles of beer, and 8,000 cigars.
Well,
Which sounds like a lot.
Only the men would smoke cigars.
Oh, yeah.
So if we
That's
say,
quite a few.
yeah, well, 1,300 passengers. So I'm guessing the crew probably wouldn't have been allowed to drink over much. So 8,000 cigars shared among, say, 13,000 people is about 650 of them are men. So 8,000 cigars between 650 men.
That's only like 3 each.
Yeah, that's not a huge amount.
Not for like every day.
No.
Nope.
But unless they had particular meals where, because on the cruise ships you've got normal attire and then you've got black tie nights.
Yeah.
So if they would have had nights where they would have retired to the smoking room, as opposed to other nights where they would go to dinner and then maybe go to a concert or something afterwards. Don't know.
You're saying concert. There's not hardcore concerts on the Titanic.
Well, not hardcore concerts. Like
the music band. Yes.
The musicians, man. We cannot forget the musicians. The musicians are the core of the story.
They definitely are. Right, so now we're going to go to that fateful night. This is obviously the biggest part of what we're going to talk about.
It's when we get a little bit more serious.
Yeah, everything else has gone by day. Like this happened on this day, this happened on this day, blah, blah, blah. This more is minutes by hours sort of thing.
So hour by hour, then minute by minute. So wireless operators, that's what they were. Wireless radio operators, the guys. So
really beautiful.
There were two wireless radio operators, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride. They'd been getting iceberg warnings, most of which they passed along to the bridge, but on the 14th of April, they received the final warning at 9:40 p.m, but that one was never relayed to the bridge.
Yeah, it's never actually been said why that one never was. Maybe because out for the 4 days they'd been on, there'd been 6 iceberg warnings. Maybe because they'd all either been missed or hadn't been listened to, or they hadn't actually turned out to be that serious.
Yeah.
They thought that maybe this one was the same.
Yeah, it's just another iceberg warning, we'll be fine.
Yeah.
They at 10:55 p.m, so this is late at night, most of the passengers are probably retiring for the night or getting ready to.
Mm-hmm.
The nearby Leyland liner, the Californian, sent word that it had stopped after becoming surrounded by ice. Jack Phillips actually yelled at the Californian for interrupting him because he was getting some other information in at the time.
Yeah, it was he was getting information from the UK, and it was disrupting. It was almost like, when you're getting a phone call now and say, oh, you're calling me, but my mum's ringing, it'll beep through on my phone, and I have to cancel. It's basically that premise.
Yeah.
So he basically was like, Californian, go, I'm busy. Yeah. And which then had quite disastrous consequences.
Yeah. The captain, Smith, he altered the ship's course slightly for them to head further south, just to probably avoid the ice. I mean, it's warmer down south, so it would make sense. Mm-hmm. However, he did maintain the ship speed of 22 knots. Basically, because she could do those speeds, he did do those speeds. They were showing off a little bit.
They were supposed to get to New York by the 18th, but he was under the pressure. It's like, imagine if we got there a bit sooner. Yeah. Like, imagine if we got there sooner than expected.
I mean, it was different for people that had hotels there. But
I think it was only they wanted a few hours, so not massive difference, but yeah.
So you had 2 lookouts stationed in the crow's nest at the time, which is a bit high up on the ship. At this point, it was like up near the funnels where they could actually look out, and they got the best view of the ship. It's been a feature on ships for centuries. They were Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee, and they were meant to be keeping an eye out. The sea was quite calm. Actually, it was a little bit too calm.
Yeah.
And because it was too calm, if you've ever seen the sea that's calm, it's like glass, which means that an iceberg off in the distance would be hard to spot, made worse by the fact that their binoculars had gone missing.
Yeah. Since the Titanic, it has been now, people have realised, they've put 2 and 2 together, that calm water does mean ice. Yeah. Before this, it wasn't really thought of for any specific reason, but now since then it's kind of been noted.
Yeah. And I mean, when there's a lot of currents going around, you get a lot of warm currents through, so it's not really good for ice. But when it's calm, there are no real currents near the surface, so you're more likely to get icebergs.
Yeah. The binoculars, they hadn't actually had the binoculars the entire time. There was supposed to be a third person on the ship, and I could not remember his name. I was looking it up on. I was looking at some facts. I did some YouTube video listening to.
Nice.
And there was supposed to be a guy who the day before the Titanic set sail was basically let go.
Okay.
That guy had binoculars for the crow's nest in a locker on the ship.
And he was the only one that could access the locker.
He never handed his key over. Subsequently, a key has actually turned up claiming to be that key, and it's sold for £900,000 in 2013, I think it was. Yeah, the key that basically had the binoculars in its locker. So, yeah.
So they spotted an iceberg at about 11:40 p.m. So at this point, passengers probably mostly asleep now. You've got your hardcore ones that are still up.
Yeah.
So an iceberg was spotted at that point. The bridge was notified.
Mm-hmm.
So everything was calm. Most of the crew were probably asleep as well. Everyone was just nice and relaxed that night. The first officer, William Murdoch, ordered the ship to hard a starboard, which means that they'll turn the ship to port, which is left. But it was too late to avoid a collision with this iceberg and hit only 37 seconds after the first sighting.
Yeah, so they didn't stand a chance of missing it.
Yeah, but sorry, that was my fingers if you had to click then, I do apologise. By turning it harder starboard, that was probably one of the worst things they could have done. They should have gone for a head-on collision and minimised the damage.
Yeah, I think he panicked. I think Murdoch panicked a little bit because he had someone ring up saying, iceberg right ahead, because that's what's said in the film, that was what was actually said.
And he probably didn't account for the speed of the ship and thought they would have time.
Yeah, so the ship's starboard side scraped along the iceberg. It all along the first 4 or 5 compartments.
Yeah.
It completely sliced.
Yeah.
Completely sliced through.
If they'd have gone head on, it would have hit a couple and they would have had to close those off.
Mm-hmm.
But she could have sustained the damage.
Yeah, and the fact that the front of the Titanic and most ships are pointed, that is specifically why. So if it hits, it kind of almost, I would say not like a knife, but almost like a knife.
Yeah, it's slicing.
Yeah, but it didn't. It scraped along the side. And at least five of its supposedly, which we'll get onto later, watertight compartments ruptured.
So they assessed the damage initially, and the designer Andrews assessed with them, which is only fair. He would know the ship like nobody else.
Yeah.
He determined that as the ship's forward compartments filled with water, its bow would drop deeper into the ocean, which would cause water from the ruptured compartments to spill over into each succeeding compartment, which meant the Titanic would sink. At this moment, they realised the unsinkable Titanic was going to sink. Yeah,
one thing that I had read that's likened it to, which kind of puts it in perspective, not perspective, but in your head.
Yeah.
If you're filling up an ice cube tray.
Yeah.
And you start filling, and when the two at the front fill, it spills into the next, into the next. That's what the compartments were like on the Titanic. As soon as one filled, it went into the next, and got lower and lower and lower.
And as the water would fill in, obviously the water's quite heavy, it would weigh and weigh and weigh, and then suck her down.
Yeah. So at this point, Captain Smith ordered Phillips to begin sending distress signals. Obviously, quite understandably. One of these reached the Carpathia at approximately 12:20 a.m., so about 40 minutes after the Titanic had hit the iceberg.
Yeah.
This was on April 15th, and the ship was actually a canard ship. You know, remember the one from the very beginning? The Duck? They immediately headed towards the sinking liner, but it would take them 3 hours to get there. But as soon as they got the distress signal, they went.
Yeah.
Phew.
By this point, bear in mind, the water was already starting to seep in. They'd lost 40 minutes at this point. Yeah, they had to do an assessment of the damage. Yes, they had to send the distress signals. But they also had to wake up the captain, get him ready, wake up the other passengers, get them ready, and start to get into action and realise how bad the damage was. So by this point, 40 minutes have gone.
Yep.
And every minute counts.
Mm-hmm. Other ships responded to the distress signals. The Olympic was too far away. They responded, but they'd never have got there.
And they didn't have the speed of the Titanic.
There was a vessel spotted nearby, but the Titanic couldn't contact it. And the Californian that we spoke about earlier, they were the closest vessel. They were only about 19 miles away, so very, very close.
Yeah.
They had, after they were told to
Foxtrot Oscar.
Pretty much, they turned off their wireless for the night.
Yeah.
Completely. We'll get into that. That has been a massive thing, and we'll get into that when we go around into the aftermath of all this. But yeah, that was they're bad.
the crew sprung into action. So whilst they were attempting to make contact with nearby vessels, the lifeboats began to be launched with the orders of women and children first, which it still is at sea. It's women and children first, well below capacity because the crewmen were worried that the davits would not be able to support the weight of a fully loaded lifeboat. They'd actually, earlier in the day, they'd meant to have a lifeboat drill, but it was cancelled. And the crew were unaware that the davits had been tested in Belfast. So they had no idea that these davits had been tested.
Yeah.
So as far as they were concerned, they were working with untested materials. They didn't want to overload them in case they then snapped and dropped everyone into the ocean, which they were trying to avoid because the water was creeping in and everyone was going to end up in the ocean anyway.
Yeah.
So let's not hasten this. Lifeboat number 7 was the first one. Try not to get OCD about that. But it held only 27 people. It had capacity for 65. I mean, that's ridiculous. That's less than half.
Yeah, one boat actually only went out with 12, and that was what was known as, nicknamed the Millionaire's Lifeboat, because it was full of just 12. I think it was like 9 millionaires and 3 crew members. And one of those millionaires has actually come under some controversy that the crew members in the boat were given £5, which equates to about £600 now.
Yeah.
And that he says he gave it as reparations for them losing their job, losing their stuff. But it's been said that he, paid them off so no one else would get in the boat.
Unfortunately, we can't confirm or deny
that.
So
No, we'll never know.
Those mysteries. I hope he didn't. I hope it was for reparations, but
people with a lot of money back then, even I think now.
Even now, yeah, money talks louder than a lot of
humanity, apparently.
Yeah, and if you're scared for your own life, you would do anything. So you got boats that were half loaded. So only out of the 2,000 odd people on the ship, only 705 people were rescued in lifeboats, and that's including the ones that they went back for.
Yeah.
As passengers waited to enter lifeboats, the musicians performed. Good old musicians. Some reporting until shortly before the ship sank. So they were playing as the ship sank. The last song was either Autumn or Nearer My God to Thee. No one is quite.
I think
agrees on it.
I think it's mostly Nearer My God to Thee is the one that a lot of people agree was the last, but Autumn has also been thrown out there, so it's can't be 100% sure.
None of the musicians survived. They played until the very end, and it cost them their lives just to try and keep the passengers calm. There was a hell of a lot of bravery that night, but that is something else because they had no need to do that.
Nope.
There was nothing to gain from it, and yet they did it. So by now we're edging close. We're at 1 o'clock in the morning now.
Yeah, so another 40 minutes on from the first distress signals being sent out to the Carpathia.
Yeah. So I mean, in a time when every minute counts, that's 80 minutes gone. Okay. So what happened at 1 o'clock?
Water was then seen at the base of E-deck. And to put that into context, E-deck was the bottom of the staircase, the grand staircase. So you're at the first class, which is at one of the higher points of the ship. You're at the bottom of that staircase.
So by this point, second class is probably mostly covered. Steerage is gone.
Yeah, boilers, they're under.
Yeah.
They're gone. Amid this growing panic, several male passengers did try and board lifeboat number 14, which caused the 5th officer, Howard Lowe, to fire his gun 3 times.
Yeah.
This is the part in the movie that is seen and has since been said that was seen shot by one of the officers, a Murdoch.
Yeah. Officer Murdoch was given this role instead of Howard Lowe.
Yeah, and but we know his gun was fired 3 times. Around this time, Philip's distress calls reflected a growing desperation, as one noted that the ship couldn't last much longer.
Yeah.
So this is the bit where you're looking at probably 60% of this ship is now underwater.
Yeah.
Everyone's panicking. People are freaking. Guns are being fired. People aren't listening. Men, I'm not saying for some men, but there's men trying to jump into ships knowing that women and children had to go first. People were panicking. They weren't thinking. And you can imagine how panicked knowing that you're probably going to die. Yeah. And you can try and help, but it's just, It's not going to work.
Yeah, and too many people trying to help as well can cause a problem.
Too many kitchen staff spoil the broth. Is that the thing?
Too many chefs.
There you go.
Too many cooks.
Yeah.
So at this point, we're getting to 2 o'clock now, and the water in the ship is starting to weigh, and it's starting to have an effect. So the bow, which is the front of the ship, is continuing to sink, which, because it's one long thing, as the front goes down, the butt comes up.
Yeah.
So the stern is starting to rise out of the water.
And you can see the propeller things, which I'm going to tell you now, seeing them coming out of the water is not a good idea. No. It doesn't fill you with a sense of everything's okay.
Especially not when the front of the ship is going into the water and the back of the ship is going out of the water.
Yeah.
Not a good sign. The stern begins to rise at this point, so obviously that's causing a lot of equilibrium. So people on the deck are starting to slip, and it's going to be a wet deck anyway. People are panicking. There's water everywhere, so that just adds a further depth to the panic, and it also puts a lot of strain on the midsection because a lot of the weight of the ship is going to be at the stern. Because you've got all the ballast there, you've got the propellers, you've got the main part of the engine. That's all going to be in the stern. Yeah. So that's going to put a lot of strain on the midsection, and that's when things start to. I was going to say start to go wrong. They were already going wrong at this point. This is when they start to get cataclysmically wrong.
Yes.
The only lifeboats that remained were the 3 collapsible boats, and Smith released the crew saying that it's every man for himself.
So until this point, the crew's job was to help the passengers.
Yeah. But
so what's 2.5 hours nearly that the crew haven't thought about themselves. The 700 crew members, they're literally just helping the passengers.
Yeah. At this point, he said, you know what? There's no hope. Go save yourselves.
Yeah.
Smith was reportedly last seen on the bridge, and you've got the old adage of the captain goes down with the ship. He did. His body has never been found. Obviously, counting for currents, drag, and time and fish, his body's probably never going to be found.
Oh no, that body's gone. They're saying all of the bodies are gone now.
Yeah. But irrespective of, because I've heard some people that don't look on Smith with a favourable light. He could have done a lot more.
There's more, yeah. Well.
But I have respect for a captain that goes down with his ship, because at that point he is willfully sacrificing himself with that ship.
Yeah. So now we're at 2:18 a.m.
Yeah.
And if things weren't getting bad enough, the ship is sinking, it's getting cold, it's getting desperate. The lights go out. It's now completely pitch black. It's obviously 2:18 a.m. in the morning, so there's not any sunlight to even help with anything. It's completely black. And it was at this point that the ship then broke in two. As you said earlier, the midsection was under strain when the bow was sinking and the stern was rising. This then broke. The bow then sunk. And it took 6 minutes to hit the ocean floor.
I mean, it was already waterlogged at this point. It literally just, now it was free of the rest of the ship. It was just sucked down.
Yeah. And it took 6 minutes to go from being visible to being at the bottom of the ocean.
Now, considering the bottom of the ocean is several miles down, that's quick.
Yeah, I think it says it was going about 30 miles an hour. So the suction would have dragged people down as well.
Yeah, that's one of the worst things about shipwrecks that people don't tend to factor in. Once the ship goes down, it will cause suction.
Yeah.
So people get sucked down with it. So you've already got a lot of casualties at this point beyond just the people that fall into the ocean. And the water is so cold as soon as you hit it. I mean, in the film, Jack describes it as knives going into you. But it does, it's that cold, it takes the breath.
Yeah, it was -4 degrees.
Yeah, instant hypothermia. So the stern momentarily settled back in the water because it had lost the front weight. So it kind of dropped back down again. So anybody that had fallen in underneath it then had the ship on top of them. But then the water would start to seep into the broken stern. So it would start to lift back up again, and it actually became vertical, completely vertical.
That bit in the film is true.
Yeah. It briefly stayed in that position before starting to sink down, and at 2:20 a.m. the stern disappeared beneath the water. The ship was gone.
So in 2 minutes from the bow going to that going.
Yeah, it took it probably felt like a lifetime to the people that were on that ship. But from the bow going under the waves to the stern, it's a grand total of 2 minutes.
Yeah, the bow is the bit that you see. If you've seen any pictures of the Titanic in the water, it's the bow that you normally see. Because when the stern went under, the water pressure allegedly caused that section, which was full of air, because obviously it went back horizontal before going vertical.
Yeah.
It imploded as it sank. So that's why it took also so long to find the wreckage, because there was little bits of the stern scattered a couple of miles before the bow.
And that was actually how they found it, by looking for that debris field.
Yeah.
The water pressure that caused that section, which still had the air inside it to implode as it sank, as you just said, that would then, of course, a knock-on effect to all the people that were outside as well, because they would have then been buffeted by that water as well. So the people in the lifeboats were then delayed returning to pick up any survivors because they were afraid of being swamped, which was fair enough. I get that. Yeah. But at the same time, they could have done more.
People were dying.
Yeah. By the time they did row back, almost all the people in the water had died from exposure to the -4.
Yeah, a lot of people died more of shock than hypothermia. Like, as soon as they hit the water, they just died. Their body just gone.
However, you were telling me about the cook.
There is a cook. This isn't our ridiculous survival, but it kind of could have been.
Yeah, it could have been.
The head cook, actually, of the whole, the head baker even, when this was going on, he decided that he was probably going to die, so was going to go to first class and have a drink.
Fair enough.
He drank some whiskey, quite a bit of it. He is known, possibly, to be the last person off that ship. He was off.
He was lucky he didn't get sucked down.
No, he didn't. He swam around for 3 hours, was picked up, had no lasting effect, and was back at work 10 days later.
Probably mostly sober by that point.
They said that the alcohol is what saved him, because his body temp had already gotten so low, but he hadn't realised, because obviously you obviously got the alcohol. You say you've got the alcohol blanket, that when it's cold outside, your body adapts, but you feel warm. So that is what kept him alive. It kept his heart beating because he was drunk.
I mean, it's funny. It's in a time when it shouldn't be funny. That is funny.
I think that's what I'd do though. If you know that you were going to die, you think like, you know,
go out with a bang.
Okay, I might as well go and get drunk on some millionaire's whiskey.
Yeah, I'd sit there, I'd sip fine champagne, some whiskey, smoke a cigar.
A lot of there was another story of a couple of the millionaire people. They were men, so they knew that their chance of survival were quite slim. So they went and they got changed into their finest outfits. They sat down on deck chairs with a brandy and a cigar, and said that we were going, and we're in this world as gentlemen, and we will go out of this world as gentlemen.
That must have been really surreal, sitting there just having a drink. Obviously, when the ship started to tilt, that would have been slightly impractical.
Yeah.
But sitting there having a drink, hearing the music, amid all the chaos, that must have been quite surreal.
Yeah.
The Carpathia did arrive in the area approximately 3:30 a.m. and that was more than an hour after the Titanic sank. So
imagine being in those lifeboats, just sat there. You've just seen the Titanic sink. Yeah. And you just sat there waiting to be rescued. Must have been eerily quiet.
That's the story I'm actually going to tell you from when I went through the Titanic Museum, because you go through and there's a little bit that shows you like the bridge of the Titanic and what they would have seen that night out of it, and then you go through into another room and it's like a giant cinema, but it's not. The screen's weird. It's loads of different columns, and you see there's a line at the top of it, but most of the screen is underwater. And you can see in the distance, and it just comes across the screen, and it's a shadowy outline of the Titanic. And then you see the shadowy outline of the iceberg, but you can hear like music and the clinking of glasses and conversation and laughter and everything. And then you hear the wrench and the scream of metal as it hits the iceberg. And then you hear the alarms, the sirens. You hear the flare gun go off, and you see like a light come over the room. You hear the screams, you hear the panic, you see the ship split in half, you see it, and then like the shadow of the ship sinks in front of you. And then the worst part is that you see the lights go out, and then you see the stern go down, and there's still screaming, and then it just goes silent. And you're literally sitting there, and you've just heard this cacophony of noise all around you, the splashing and the screaming and the sound of metal and oars splashing and everything, and then it's just silence. And it's so eerie. And that moment, I was sitting with Sean, my ex-ish, and we just sat there, and both of us just had tears, and we didn't even realise we were crying. but we just both sat there crying, and just remembering it, I'm tearing it up again now. But yeah, it was a horrendous moment. Just the silence was worse than any of the other noise.
Yeah, I can imagine. It must have been horrific.
And then it was after that you went into the room with the pocket watch.
Nice.
No. So yeah, the Carpathia got there. Lifeboat number 2 was the first one to reach the Carpathia, and over the next several hours she went around and picked up all the survivors. And they sent their own little boats out just to have a look through to see if there was anybody left. The White Star chairman, Ismay, he wrote a message to be sent to the White Star Line's offices saying, "Deeply regret to advise you, Titanic sank this morning, 15th, after collision iceberg, resulting serious loss of life, further particulars later."
He did survive, but he wasn't like wasn't one of the first on the boats. No. He was there helping all the women and children get on, and he actually was one of the last people to get on a ship.
I mean, fair dues to him for that.
Yeah.
At approximately 8:30 a.m, the Californian arrived, the one that was closest. And shortly before 9 o'clock in the morning, the Carpathia headed for New York City, where it arrived to massive crowds on April the 18th. So by this point, the news had got out.
40,000 people went to the docks in New York to greet the Carpathia.
So it's done. The ship has sunk. Hundreds and hundreds of people are dead.
Yeah.
So out of because the full capacity on the Titanic could have been 3,547 people.
Yeah.
Only 2,223 people were on the ship, and out of those, only 706 survived. Less than half survived.
Yeah, so you got more than 1,500 people perished.
Yeah, statistically, that's 31.6% of passengers and crew survived.
53.5% could have survived if the spaces on the lifeboats were filled. Not if, because obviously everyone knows that there wasn't enough lifeboats for everybody. Yeah. That's something we'll get onto a little bit later. But if all the spaces that were available on lifeboats had been filled, that would have been 53.5% of people would have. So another 22.1% would have been saved.
About 1,100 people could have survived instead of 706.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, when you put it as a statistic, 31% to 53%, doesn't sound like much. 706 to 1,100. Mm-hmm. That's a big difference.
That is a very big difference.
Yeah.
Of those that did survive, 20% of those were male, where 75% were female. So obviously, being a first-class female, you're pretty set.
Yeah. There were 109 children on the Titanic, of whom just 56 survived. Of the fatalities, there was a single child victim in first class, none in second class, whilst in third class 52 children lost their lives. Now here I'm going to tell you another story. These are the orphans of the Titanic. And I'm going to tell you this because I'm pretty sure I've never told you, so I'm going to get your reaction here.
Right.
There was a man and a woman, and they had 2 sons, but their marriage broke down because he believed that she was cheating on him.
Oh.
He wanted to start a new life. So he effectively kidnapped his children, 2 boys, and took them on the Titanic to start a new life in America. The mother obviously was frantic. She was looking for her children. She didn't know what happened. He'd kidnapped them and taken them away. Obviously, things happened as they did. He put his boys on the lifeboat. The boys survived. His last words were to them, "Tell your mother that I love her."
Oh, Christ.
And he drowned.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, and they are nicknamed, even though the mother survived, obviously because she didn't go on the ship, They are nicknamed the orphans of the Titanic. Yep.
Jesus.
More than 1,500 people in total perished, and of them, about 700 were crew.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've emoted a little bit.
You're right, Carrie.
No.
I'll speak for a little bit.
Thank you.
I'll give me some time.
I'll just wet my whistle.
So, as we said before, obviously there was quite a lot of prominent people on the Titanic, but many of the era's wealthiest and most prominent people died. Among them, as we said before, was
Isidore?
That's it. Isidore and Ida Strauss. The guy was the head of Macy's department store in New York City.
Yeah,
Everyone
they are
knows
the Macy's Day Parade.
They are. It's a massive store. Everyone knows it. He was in charge of it. If you've seen the movie The Titanic, have you seen the 1997 James Cameron movie Titanic?
I have indeed. Have you?
I have. I love it. I'm very recently discovered how attractive Leonardo DiCaprio is, and I don't understand how I didn't get it when I first watched the movie.
Can I just put in a slight word, even though the character's a dick, a slight word for Billy Zane?
100%.
Fantastic actor. Very, very underrated actor.
Yep.
And also, Kate Winslet. What a babe.
Yep. We'll totally talk about the movie.
Yeah.
But there is a point I did bring the movie up. Do you remember when the Titanic was sinking, they had that montage of people who had decided they were going to stay on and die?
Like the mother that told her children about Tea and Oak. Oh
yeah.
my god, that got to me. Oh.
Do you remember the old couple
yes.
who laid in bed cuddling as water rushed in their room?
Yes.
That is a true story, and that is Isidore and Ida Strauss.
Wow.
They'd been married for 45 years. Actually, Ida got on a lifeboat, and she said, "I'm not going without my husband." So Isidore was offered a lifeboat, and he said, "I'm not getting on one while there are women and children on this boat still."
Very noble of him.
So then Ida said, We've been through life together. We will die together too." And then they went and got in their bed, and that's a true story. And they were like some of the richest. They were one of the richest couple in the whole of the whole of the United States of America.
Nice.
Money didn't matter to them too.
Just as long as they were together.
Yeah. And then you had John Jacob Astor. Yeah. He also died.
But we talked about how the loss of the third class. So that's the first class. So we talked about the loss of the third class.
Yeah.
Okay. I was emotional. Sorry.
It's okay. Third class obviously had the biggest losses with the men, but we'll get on to that. I have put that in the movie to be talked about when we talk about the movie. How third class were actually depicted. But in the popular mind, so like nowadays, you've got the fame people. These were the people of the Kardashians, I guess, of that time. So glamour was associated with the ship. Rich people were associated. It was his maiden voyage. It magnified the tragedy of the sinking.
Yeah, I mean, if you think there's a lot of millionaires, a lot of heirs and things that have died. I mean, I know it's a complete segue, but if you look at the first season of Downton Abbey, the heir to Downton Abbey supposedly drowned on the Titanic.
Yeah.
So, and that threw the whole thing into chaos about the entail, and that was like the plot of it.
Yeah.
Even though that was fictional characters, a fictional story, that kind of thing did happen. You lost a lot of heirs, you lost a lot of businessmen, you lost a lot of prominent figures.
Yeah. So, out of this, obviously, you want to think of kind of the goods, the side of the Titanic. There were heroes and heroines that came out of this. Notably, you had the unsinkable Molly Brown.
Good old Molly Brown.
Yeah, she's depicted in the movie as new money because she had recently come into her money.
Yeah.
There has been a musical about her made and a movie called The Unsinkable Molly Brown. This was because she helped command a lifeboat.
Yeah, she commandeered a lifeboat from the officer that was
I don't know if you've seen, as I think that in the movie, a lifeboat crew member says to her, "Sit down, be quiet, or I will shut that hole in your face."
Yeah.
That was said in real life the other way round. Molly Brown said this. Everyone to a crew member. He wasn't going to go back, and she was like, "No, there's people drowning. There's people dying. We are going." So she commanded that lifeboat and went back and saved some people.
Because you can see that in the film that she's leaning forward, holding a lantern on the lifeboat that comes back. Because isn't that the lifeboat that finds Rose?
Yeah.
Or one of the other ones. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you also had Captain Arthur Henry Rostron of the Carpathia. Of course, he's going to come out of this a hero. He was the ship who immediately turned around and saved their 706 people. Yeah. Because we can't say that people in the lifeboats would have survived. It was absolutely freezing. Yeah. So they were identified and totally celebrated by celebrated by the press.
Yeah.
But obviously, if you've got some heroes and heroines, you've got some villains.
Yeah. Ismay, he found a space on the lifeboat and survived, where Andrews and the captain had gone down with it. So they're like, well, why? Despite the fact that he helped people, they're saying, well, why did you survive? Why didn't you go down with the ship that you were so proud of? So he was vilified.
As was the captain of the Californian, which we will get onto. So obviously, after this tragedy, there was a massively strong desire to explain it.
Yeah, you've got to find out why.
And also, if things go wrong, they normally want people to blame.
Yeah, it's easy when you've got someone to blame, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. So there were, because it was obviously, it happened on the way to the US, and there's a lot of prominent US figures, but it was also like a British-made ship. There was 2 separate inquiries, a US and a UK inquiry.
Okay, the US inquiry, they interviewed 80 people, and passengers testified to general confusion on the ship. So obviously there was going to be confusion because it wasn't supposed to sink.
Yeah.
The second officer, Charles Lightoller, defended Captain Smith.
Yeah.
Which in a way is to be expected, but also is good that he inspired that loyalty. They said that the general warning was never sounded, and because of the lack of lifeboat drill, the lowering of boats was haphazard. The California crew was 20 nautical miles away, saw a boat but assumed it was too small to be the Titanic. Yeah. The distance. They also stated that it was moving and that efforts to contact it by Morse lamp were unsuccessful.
A Morse lamp is not very bright.
No.
To be seen 20 nautical miles away.
On a dark night by everyone when everyone's in a panic. After sighting rockets in the distance, the crew informed their captain, Stanley Lord, who had retired for the night, and instead of ordering the ship's wireless operator to turn on the radio, he instead told the men to continue using the Morse lamp.
This is where he gets villainized.
Yeah. The US investigation faulted the British Board of Trade due to their laxity of regulation and hasty inspection. The world is largely indebted for this awful fatality.
That's a quote.
Yeah, that's a direct quote. They also blamed Captain Smith for not slowing down, which, in fairness, he could have done. He could have slowed down a little bit if he'd got a nice warning. And Captain Lord of the Californian was criticised the most, stating, again a direct quote, that nearer the Titanic than the 90 miles reported by her captain, and that her officers and crew saw the distress signals of the Titanic and failed to respond to them in accordance with the dictates of humanity, international usage, and the requirements of law. So basically not just saying that you failed in the eyes of the law and international usage, you failed as humans.
Yeah, that's pretty hardcore. Now, the UK investigation actually brought up very little new evidence. Because obviously they had the same people to interview, people give the same testimonies. They actually said that they couldn't blame Captain Smith. The US led some blame on him, but they said that they couldn't because he, and I quote, he was only doing that which other skilled men would have done in the same position. Yeah. So basically they looked at Captain Smith and looked at other sea captains and been like, what would you have done if it was your ship? Yeah. You had an unsinkable ship. Would you think, oh, I better slow down because she might sink, when you've been told that she couldn't? Yeah. So they were like, you can't really blame him because he done just what anybody else would have done. Yeah. And, but again, Captain Lord was in the firing line. The British investigators claimed that the liner was some 5 to 10 nautical miles away, which is like 9 to 19 kilometres, from the Titanic, and, as a quote, she might have saved many, if not all, of the lives that were lost.
Yeah, at the very least, she could have got the ones out of the water, and then the ones in the lifeboat could have been picked up by the Carpathia.
Yeah, the Carpathia took 3 hours to get there. They probably could have got there in 40 minutes. Yeah. Imagine. They could have got there before the Titanic sank.
Could have got most of the people off, and they could have used some of their lifeboats as well.
Yeah, so Captain Lord all he said is that one no.
Yeah. If they'd have turned on the telegraph machine, it could have made such a difference. Yeah. But with the Titanic, there was a lot of shoulda, woulda, couldas.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
In 1913, the first International Conference for Safety of Life at Sea was called in London as a direct result of what happened with the Titanic. Yeah. The conference drew up rules requiring that every ship have lifeboat space for each person embarked, and that lifeboat drills be held for each voyage, and because the Californian had not heard the distress signals of the Titanic, that ships maintain a 24-hour radio watch. That's still all in place today.
Yeah.
if you go on a ship, one of the first things they do, pretty much before you've even had time to unpack or anything, is the lifeboat drill.
Yeah, we did that. I've been on one cruise.
Yeah.
I can't compare it to your cruise or any other cruise, I don't think, because I went on a Disney cruise.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure a Disney cruise is totally different to any other cruise. I mean, it's still ridiculously luxurious. There was two massive theatres. There was 4 different restaurants. There was cafes. There was a swimming pool. There was a log flume on the Disney one where you go out over the sea. It was really cool.
Didn't I have that on Princess Cruise?
Yeah. But we did that. The very first thing we did was the lifeboat drill.
I remember walking in on the first cruise that I went with Princess. I've been with Princess and Royal Caribbean, and the Princess line was absolutely ridiculous. You walked through the main entrance, the main hallway of it, and I just remember looking at my mum and thinking, Jesus, what? Why are we here? We do not belong here. And then we literally got into our cabins and put everything down when the cabin hand came round and knocked on the door and said, we're going to do a lifeboat drill in 10 minutes. And we literally had time to put our stuff down, and then we grabbed our life jackets and went straight out. And you'd meet in different muster points, and you'd all be checked off on a list and everything, and then you were told what to do. So that's all as a result of the Titanic. So even now, without realising it, you've got the knock-on effects.
As well as that, the International Ice Patrol was established.
That sounds pretty cool.
It does, doesn't it? It was established to warn ships of icebergs in North Atlantic sea lanes and to break up ice. So there's specific boats that are made to go through iceberg, to go through ice, on the water to break them up. And that was created and established because of the Titanic.
Now, obviously, we know it was in 1912, all these things happened. A lot of things sort of conspired to come together at this point, but things were conspiring a long time before 1912.
This was one of the coolest things that I found out.
Scientists have tried to figure out where the iceberg come from, and they've actually succeeded. It was snowfall from western Greenland in 1000 BCE, before Common Era, and over the centuries the snow then compacted and pushed further, and everyone who's made a really firm snowball will know you compact snow, it becomes ice. And it pushed further westward towards Canada.
Where it was then hit in 1912 very rudely by ship. Yeah. It'd just been chilling for thousands of years.
The thing is, it actually got stuck in a fjord between 2 bits of land, and there was other ice building up behind it. And if things had been slightly different, so if it had got stuck at a slightly different angle, or that last bit of ice hadn't built up behind it, it would have taken another few days for it to squeeze through that fjord. So it would not have gone down. And if the currents hadn't been the way they were, if the weather hadn't been the way it was, it wouldn't have gone down quite as fast.
Right. Yeah. So I think that's quite cool that it was the ice that sunk the Titanic snow fell like
3,000 years before.
Right.
It's crazy.
It drives you crazy. So, within days of the Titanic sinking, talk began of finding the wreckage, which it would.
Yeah.
But given the limits of technology at the time, serious attempts could not be undertaken until the second half of the 20th century.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't have the technology to go that deep without getting the bends or causing serious problems, because you've got the pressure at that point, haven't you?
Yeah.
On the 1st of September 1985, the first underwater images of the Titanic were recorded, and its giant boilers were discovered by Robert Ballard and his expedition people, and later video then showed the ship lying upright in 2 distinct pieces.
Yeah, so I don't know if any of you have heard of Disney Plus. At the minute, there's a documentary on that we watched last night, and it showed that moment. It was recorded, and on the documentary, it shows the moment that Robert Ballard and his crew find the Titanic,
and it shows how he did it as well.
Yeah,
because they were looking for the debris field, because they were looking for something else at first. They were looking for submarines.
Yeah,
and they thought, you know what, we're in the area. Let's look for the Titanic. So they started scanning for the debris field, and they found the debris field like a mile out, didn't they? And then they followed it, and then they found the boiler.
Yeah.
And it was at that moment they knew they'd found it. And they found one of the boilers, and then they carried on going, and then the ship, you see it in the video, the ship just emerges out of the murk, and it's it's devastating because of the condition she's in now, but there's something strangely beautiful about it.
Yeah, but that's what scares me so much about the ocean. That a ship the size of the bloody Titanic could not be found for 60 odd years. How is that not terrifying? I mean,
imagine the wealth of wrecks that just litter the ocean floor. Like all the treasure though.
How does that not scare people? I don't get it.
I find it fascinating.
Anyway, the bow, as you said before, was clearly visible, but the stern section was severely damaged. Like we said before, because of the air, it basically imploded on impact in the water.
Yeah.
But covering the wreckage was rust-coloured stalactite formations, which Robert later determined and called them rusticles.
Yeah, they're like icicles, but rust.
Yep.
So yeah.
They're the things that are like falling off the Titanic that you can see on the pictures, and they were created by iron-eating microorganisms that are consuming the wreckage.
So not only is a giant ship invisible underwater for 60 odd years, there's also tiny microorganisms that eat through iron.
Yep. Who says? Yep, that's the ocean.
The expeditions found no sign of the long gash that was previously thought to have been ripped in the ship's hull by the iceberg. So they couldn't find it. Bear in mind that some of it will be covered by sand. But
everyone had thought it was just one long gash. That was what it was. But however, they discovered that the collision's impact had actually produced a series of thin, smaller gashes, as well as a brittle fracturing and separations of the seams in the adjacent hull plates, which allowed water to flood in and the ship to sink.
So basically, instead of hitting and just gashing along it, like if you cut your hand on a knife, it more scudded across.
Almost like, when you skim rocks on the ocean, the water, it's kind of like that. A series of smaller, thinner, but a lot more of them. So basically different compartments were hit.
So there was no chance really at that point. Mm-hmm. Due to organisms that are slowly eating the Titanic, experts think that the ship could be completely collapsed by 2030. So in 10 years' time, the ship we'll have no more Titanic. Clive Palmer, the Australian billionaire, announced in 2012 that he was making an exact replica of the Titanic called the Titanic 2 and having it take the exact same journey, and it's due to set sail in 2022. The original plan was to have it in 2012. That didn't quite go ahead. They're going to do it in 2022.
Would you get on that?
I'm morbid curious.
An exact replica. This is obviously a guy with so much money.
More money than
anything. That he's building an exact to the millimetre replica of the Titanic on the inside, on the outside, everything.
I mean, it would be horrendously expensive. I'd like to think that they put more safety procedures in place using modern technology.
They have to now. Yeah. They have to by law.
Out of a sense of morbid curiosity, I think I would.
But it's actually doing the Southampton to France, the island to Southampton to France to Ireland to New York.
Yeah. But at the same time, history has a way of repeating itself. And there's a whole saying of don't tempt fate.
Yeah. I wonder if it's going to stop at and moor itself at the exact, spot.
I think that would be a nice touch just to do that and then maybe have a minute silence or something, or 2 minute silence. But I'd have a 2 minute silence from the time it took for the whole ship to sink.
Yeah.
But at the same time, please take binoculars. Please.
Yeah. So now we're going to talk about, obviously, things about the Titanic that we know.
Yeah.
Was the ship doomed from the start, Carrie?
We've said that a lot of things have conspired, and to be honest with you, there was a lot of preventable things and a lot of unpreventable things. But yes, I think it was doomed from the start.
So, I don't know if you know, but from the very beginning, the voyage nearly began with a collision within its first hour.
Pretty much as soon as it...
as when it there was a ship called the New York City.
Yeah.
And it was coming into to Ireland, to Queenstown. And it had kind of knocked off course and was heading for the Titanic. It managed to manoeuvre itself away and get past, and it delayed them officially starting their voyage by an hour.
I mean...
But it almost, before it even left Ireland, it almost had a collision straight away.
It would have been probably a little bit better if the Titanic had sunk in Cove Harbour.
Probably. People would have to get there a bit quicker.
Having said that, the Lusitania was later bombed during the war. It was hit and sunk to the loss of all lives on board. not far from Cove Harbour.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
16 compartments that included doors which could be closed from the bridge so that water could be contained were part of the ship. That
Watertight one, yeah.
They were presumed to be watertight, but the bulkheads weren't capped at the top.
So watertight doors that don't go all the way to the top.
Yeah. Builders then claimed that 4 compartments could flood without endangering the liner's buoyancy. Yeah, the 4 compartments could flood if the doors could close.
Yep.
Yeah. So, slight building fault there.
I just don't get it. We're going to make these watertight doors that have a big old gap at the top.
Yeah. So I'm pretty sure water gets through there. I mean, water is a liquid.
Yeah.
Huh.
Although the Titanic's number of lifeboats actually exceeded the required amount by the British Board of Trade at that time.
Mm-hmm.
It was done on the amount of tons.
Yeah, it was done on
the size of the boat rather than passengers. Yeah. So the 20 boats could carry only 1,178 people. So it was far shorter than the number of passengers on board. So even if they had all of the lifeboats, all of the boats were filled, you're still going to have 1,100 people die.
Yeah, because wasn't one or two of the collapsible lifeboats were just washed off?
Yeah.
So they couldn't be used anyway.
Yeah.
So even all the lifeboats at capacity would barely have saved half of the ship.
Yeah. Even if they had a lifeboat, every single lifeboat on there.
In subsequent years, marine salvagers have actually raised small artefacts from the wreckage as well as pieces of the ship itself, which includes a large section of the hull. They've examined these parts as well as the paperwork in the builder's archives, and this has led to speculation that low quality steel or weak rivets may have contributed to the Titanic sinking.
Yeah, there was 3 million of these rivets were used to join these pieces together, but they were made from like a mix of iron and steel.
Yeah.
Except for the iron rivets at the bow, which, the iceberg hit the bow.
Yeah.
They were made from even less quality steel rivets.
Because they were trying to cut costs, and they were trying to cut time as well, because the Olympic had already sailed at this point, and they wanted the Titanic out as soon as possible.
Yeah. So, Carrie, are you one for coincidence? Are you one for pre-cognitive thinking?
Coincidence doesn't exist. The universe is really that lazy.
So, there's this dude called Morgan Robertson.
Yeah.
He wrote a novella called The Wreck of Titan.
Mm-hmm.
It was about an unsinkable ship. It hit an iceberg, and it didn't have enough lifeboats.
Okay.
Sound familiar?
Pretty much, yeah.
It was written 14 years before the Titanic sank.
Oh.
In 1898. So he wrote a book about an unsinkable ship that hit an iceberg, sunk, and didn't have enough lifeboats. 14 years before the Titanic, hit an iceberg, sunk, with not enough lifeboats on it.
So obviously, with disasters come novelisations, dramatisations, movies, things like that, because we do like to remember a disaster in the hopes that we don't repeat it, but also it makes for good viewing.
Yeah.
Let's be honest, as horrible as that sounds, it does make for good viewing. And the Titanic is no exception. Starting in 1955, Walter Lord published A Night to Remember, which was a book that he had after people had begun talking less about the Titanic. So, in a way, to keep it alive in the memory. And then in 1958, that was made into a movie.
I haven't actually seen that movie.
I haven't either.
I've heard about it, but I haven't seen it.
I'd be intrigued to.
Yeah. Then you have the 1997 box office smash, The Titanic.
Yeah. That was written and directed by James Cameron.
Yep.
And he's since put a lot of the profits from the film back into the maintenance of the Titanic and its research, and has made 33 dives to the ship and a documentary, Titanic 20 Years On, which is the one on Disney+.
Yeah.
And that shows what he got right and what he got wrong in the movie.
That's what he wanted to do, because he's like obsessed with the Titanic now. Isn't he? So he wanted to look back and see what he got right.
And the money that he's done, the exploration he's done, has actually helped a lot with the technology of like deep sea exploration and diving. Mm-hmm. So James Cameron, massive thank you for that.
Yeah, definitely. And the Titanic was massive. Mm-hmm. No expense was spared. It cost more to make the movie than it did to build the original ship. Because he built like a replica of the ship.
Yeah.
He wanted it all to be right. Obviously, he said there were some things that he didn't get accurate. One thing that we spoke about earlier, in the movie it's depicted that the third class passengers were not allowed on lifeboats, and they were basically locked. in steerage. They weren't allowed to get up. That's a lie. The helping people into lifeboats were for women and children of all classes.
Yeah.
When that happened, third class could get up, was sitting in boats with first class. That bit wasn't a lie. That bit was a lie. It was done for the movie because of the whole Jack and Rose storyline, which is also not true.
Yeah.
They needed it for Jack and Rose's separation of class to seem even bigger, so that being together was a bigger deal.
Yeah. Also, the Officer Murdoch. We said it was Officer Lowe earlier. It actually was Officer Lowe that fired his gun 3 times. But in the film, it's Officer Murdoch, and he shoots one of the third class passengers and then shoots himself. That didn't happen. He was actually trying to help people into the boats, and one of the things that James Cameron says is that he was trying to make the movie.
He was thinking as a writer, not as a historian.
So he didn't think of the impact of that on people. Obviously, these were real people, so their families are watching, and apparently it did quite offend Murdoch's family, and he's apologetic for that, and he says, I wasn't really thinking about the impact on people.
Yeah.
So he was helping people into lifeboats.
He was, which, like, I think that's nice, and there's so much on the Titanic. When I was starting to research it, there's so much that the disaster didn't need to happen.
No, I mean, they were almost actually delayed in Southampton because they didn't have enough. There was a coal shortage at the time because it was a strike. And to make sure that the Titanic left on time, they actually took coal, they commandeered coal from nearby vessels, delaying them so that she could go on time. If they'd have waited a couple of days, the iceberg would have gone by then.
Yeah, so much could have changed it.
Yeah.
But
it is what it is, and because of that, we have the Titanic.
We have a better understanding, and more lives have been saved because of all the things that were put in place, because of the sinking, the different organisations that have been established. You do have to have.
It took that to get that.
Yeah, but I'm hoping that without it, the world has progressed. We would have realised that you had to be safer on boats.
Hopefully, but chances are, if it wasn't for the Titanic, it probably would have been a bigger disaster later down the line.
Yeah.
That then caused it.
Yeah.
So that is the Titanic.
Mm-hmm.
And it's we tried to stay a bit more relaxed about it, but it is a disaster. Lives were lost. It's horrible.
Yeah, but it is something that everyone has heard of the Titanic.
Yeah.
Everyone has heard of the Titanic.
And there's a reason for it. So hopefully we've given you a little bit more of in-depth knowledge about it.
Mm-hmm.
So, from a disaster to a ridiculous survival.
Yeah, we can't have a ridiculous death. None of the deaths were ridiculous.
No. This is Arthur John Priest, also known as the Unsinkable Stoker. He was born to Harry Priest, a labourer, and Elizabeth Garner. And in 1915, he married Annie Martin, known as Hampton previously, in Birkenhead. They had 3 children called Arthur, John, George, and Frederick Harry.
Yeah. We both inhaled, so who was going to speak? You. Priest said before worked as a stoker, which means he worked in the bowels of steam-powered ships.
Yeah.
He was one of the ones putting the coal into the. I'm doing the actions now.
Yeah.
You can see me. He's the one who powered the boat. He was considered as part of the Black Gang of 27 men. This consisted of 6 firemen, 2 trimmers, and the fireman steward known as Peggy, who would be the one who'd go and get them food and water for the people who were working in the bowels of the ship.
Yeah. Now, just for clarity, they were called the Black Gang because they were constantly covered in soot.
Soot and coal and stuff, yeah.
Yeah. It was considered backbreaking work and was often done while stripped down to the waist due to the sustained and intense heat of the furnaces.
Yeah.
Priest is known for surviving a grand total of 5 ship sinkings and 1 collision.
So, yeah.
The Unsinkable Stoker.
Definitely.
Life wasn't pleasant for him. He did seem to have a string of bad luck whilst working on different ships.
Yeah. After surviving the sinking of 5 ships in total, and like you said, 1 major collision, Priest finally retired from working at sea and left his job as a stoker aboard ships.
Probably for the best.
Yeah, but he was on, as I've said, a number of ships that sank.
Yeah, the ships that he voyaged on included the HMHS Asturias in 1907, the RMS Olympic in 1911, the RMS Titanic in 1912, the RMS Alcantara in 1916, the HMHS Britannic in 1916, so that's Olympic Titanic and Britannic, all sank, and the SS Donegal in 1917. He survived them all.
He did. Like, that is you got to think someone's looking. You got a guardian angel there.
Yeah, but also at some point, would you not be one of the people that like, I've heard about you from these other ships, I'm not getting on that ship with you?
Funny you should say that. He lived out the rest of his days on dry land in Southampton with his wife Annie, and his retirement seemed forced upon him.
Yeah.
Because people claimed that no one wished to sail with him after these disasters.
Well, yeah, he's a jinx. I mean, if there's one thing that's true about sailors, they are incredibly superstitious.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Crazily superstitious.
Yeah. But other than the disasters, there's not actually much known about him. He died in Southampton at the age of 49 from pneumonia. His wife Anne was by his side. This was in 1937. So he had also survived the First World War.
Yeah.
And history has given him the name of the unsinkable stoker. 5 ships, 1 major collision, and he dies of pneumonia at home.
5 ships, 1 collision, 1 World War, and yeah, pneumonia.
Mhm.
Wow.
Yep.
So, Mr. Priest, the unsinkable stoker.
Definitely.
Here's to you. Right. Well, that was Titanic.
Yep. We will be back in a week or 2 with another historical podcast. Check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Cup of History, and go on Buzzsprout and Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Podcasts,
and now iHeartRadio as well.
Yep, and listen. This is season 2, episode 5.
I think it's episode 5. Yeah.
5. We obviously have a lot of other episodes to listen to.
Yeah.
Give us a listen, a like, a comment, suggestion of what you want us to do next.
Yeah, we're always open to suggestions because we learn as much from this as we hopefully impart on you.
Definitely, especially at these times of uncertainty.
We hope to bring you the certainty of historical knowledge. That was good, wasn't it?
That wasn't bad. That was totally off the cuff. Well done, Kat. That was good.
Yeah, but, at the time, we know that schools are out and people are lacking things to do, so we'd like to help with education a little bit.
Yeah.
So, by all means, hit us up, let us know what you want to hear, and we'll give it a go.
And we'll speak to you soon.
Bye.